What's up, my brothers and sisters? Welcome to the Fireground Fitness Podcast, where we talk about all things pertaining to life on and off the fireground. The views and the opinions shared are those of your host and our guest. Today we sit down with Matt Shields. He's a fire captain in the city of Phoenix and also a former Army Ranger. He is an all-around good guy / badass, and we have a great conversation talking about all things leading up to his career in the fire service and things that he's learned while he's here. It's a fantastic conversation. I hope you enjoy. Matt, welcome to the Fireground Fitness Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I wanted to talk to you. I want to talk to you a little bit about some of your experiences as a fire captain and the things that you've learned. And I want to talk to you about your experience in the Army and, how inadequate you feel that you're not a Marine. And
That's cute. That's cute.
And, those kind of things. And, and the journey, I want to talk to you about the journey that you took to get to this place, to become a captain, in the, large fire department in the Southwestern United States that rhymes with Phoenix, right?
Yeah.
There's a journey in there. And in that journey, we learned so much. And I want to hear kind of your perspective and take on how you got here, how you got to where you are. And, take me back. How did you get here? Where'd you grow up?
So I was born and raised in Cave Creek, Arizona.
Local boy.
Yep. Grandfathered in before it was fancy North Scottsdale. I was born at PV Hospital. My uncle was on the fire department, and so I had been riding along.
Who was your uncle?
Barry Richards.
Oh, okay.
Retired about 10 years ago.
Okay.
BLS engineer. So when I was about 12 or 14.
Let's just be honest. So backbone of the fire department right there, BLS engineers.
Oh, yeah. And hazmat.
Indeed. There it is. Goodness gracious.
But so I got to start coming to the fire station like 12 or 14 and very quickly realized that seemed like about the best job I was ever going to be able to score in my life. So kind of in the back of my head, I knew that was where I wanted to end up.
So at that age, what was it about the fire service that attracted you, though? You see, it's the best job you could ever have, but like what?
Well, made good money.
Yeah.
And when I came home from the hospital, I came home to a single wide. So never in a million years thought that I'd be making anywhere close to what we have the ability to make.
Yeah.
And then just they had such a good time, the fellowship, being able to help people while you're having fun, taking care of the team, doing, there wasn't any part of it that didn't seem appealing to me.
Nice.
So then throughout high school, I was really good at making bad decisions and got myself to the position where as I was getting ready to graduate high school, I knew there was no chance that I was going to be going to like college, like university stuff.
Yeah.
And recognized that if I didn't come up with some sort of hard reset, I would be not doing well for the rest of my adult life. So I actually tried to join the Marines first. And when I went to the recruiter, I told him that I had asthma. I had asthma pretty bad as a kid. And they immediately told me that I was not eligible and couldn't join. And that was one of the best things that ever happened.
It's because the Marine Corps standards are so high.
Well, obviously. But so I worked at the Satisfied Frog up in Cave Creek, and one of the food runners there was a old Ranger from Vietnam. And he was the one that talked me into, like, if you were going to join the military and you want to go try and pick fights, like, that's a pretty good unit to get into if you want to go try and pick fights.
Yeah.
And so I was...
What year was this?
I graduated in 2003, so this was 2002-ish. I talked to him quite a bit. Well, I worked there from when I was 16 until I left for the Army when I was 19, like less than a year after graduating high school.
Yeah.
And so when I went to the Army recruiter and MEPS, I told them that I had never been sick a day in my life and that I had never broken any bones and that everything was perfect. And they looked at me very skeptical, but obviously they didn't do any sort of good background checks.
Right.
Because it worked out.
Nice. They just let you swipe around through, so the asthma thing just went away.
Yep.
And how did your asthma? Did you have asthma?
Oh yeah, no, I had it like I think I was lucky in that the majority of it went away through puberty.
Right.
But
so
I'll still
grew out of it.
Yeah, I'll still get it I still have an inhaler at home, and like if there's a bad weather change or if I get sick, like it can go respiratory. I imagine a little more often than others, but it's fine.
Nice. Good. Because I think about your track and a lot of cardio involved there, a lot of heavy breathing involved, a lot of work. So,
but I was always, I grew up on land. My dad always had a construction company, and then we always had horses. My next door neighbor owned a plant nursery and a landscaping company. So I grew up always outside, always having to work. And so I think that I kind of worked it out a little bit too.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you went into the Army, were you intent on being a Ranger? Was that the plan?
Yes. So I was initially promised, the recruiters for the military are the biggest used car salesmen on the planet.
Yeah.
They showed me a video of dudes riding jet skis. I still ain't never seen a Army jet ski that you could use on base. Were they like
jet skis that were like OD green, or
they're like, oh no, on your bases there's recreational spots and you can go and use these and take them out and yeah, whatever. So I did get in my contract that if I met all the prerequisites, I would have a spot in selection, which at the time was RIP, the Ranger Indoctrination Process. Now it's RASP, Ranger Assessment and Selection Process, I think. So had that, but went on the day that I was supposed to sign. I'm in the main office, and thank God my dad was there with me, and my dad doesn't put up with much BS. They had told me that last day, we can't actually get you a Ranger contract, but as long as you're the top of basic, infantry, and airborne school, they'll offer you a spot. And me being nervous and thinking I'm already basically in the Army at that point, it's like, oh, yes, sir, I'll take what I could get. And my dad's like, no, bullshit. We're walking right now if you don't put in his contract that he's got a slot in selection. I was like, you can't talk to him like that. And it's like, I'm not in the Army.
Okay, stop for a second. Isn't that so interesting how when we're young, we're so, and I appreciate sometimes that, authority has sway over us in a lot of ways. However, learning to advocate for ourselves comes with maturity and time in, right? And man, I wish I had learned that at a younger age, how to self-advocate, because there's so many times when people are looking out for their interest and not necessarily yours, as is the case right here. This recruiter had a billet he had to fill in one spot, and he was like, well, I bet I can get him over here. That's frustrating to me.
I think it's because before we learn better, we take everything at face value of why would anybody tell us anything other than exactly what it is and how it's supposed to be. Right. And
especially the recruiter. He's my advocate, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Why would he lie to me?
Yeah. How dare you do something like that?
Right. So what happened when your dad pushed back?
Magically, they said, okay, well, give me some time. Magically, they came back in 20 minutes. And we're like, okay, we figured it out and we've got him locked in. He's got it. As long as he makes all his prerequisites, he's got a spot in selection. So signed up. It ended up delaying my leaving from when I signed. It was 7 months before I went to basic.
Which is another pressure point, right? Because a lot of times when guys are going in and signing up, they're like, I got to go. I'm ready to leave right now, because you're young and you think the world is, not going to wait for you. right? Or that time is, like so critical. 7 months is an eternity.
Yeah, or is my dumbass going to do something in the 7 months that makes me ineligible?
Right. Yeah, there's that too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what did you do in those 7 months?
Worked, and then like if you did so much pre-work and PT test stuff, you could go in as E3, a private first class, rather than just a private.
Right.
So I did all that stuff, and really got ready. I didn't tell my mom that I was joining the Army until after I signed. So she was not happy at all.
Yeah. Had anybody in your family previously served?
My uncles on my mom's side, Barry was in the Marines.
Okay.
And two of my uncles were in the Air Force, and retired out of the Air Force. And Barry would always make fun of him that his retirement as a truck driver paid more than their retirement flying planes in the Air Force, which is awesome. Nobody on my dad's side was in the Army or in the military.
Yeah. So was that contribute to your mom's resistance, you think?
I would say it was, I was her only child, and just her knowing me and that I don't really have a great identifying myself being in harm's way. So she was just worried about me.
And let's be honest, man, you're always your mama's baby, no matter how old you are.
Oh yeah.
And so it's hard for moms to see their kids go off to war or even just join the military during peacetime. Either way, right? But you're going in during the middle of as the GWAT's unfolding.
Mm-hmm.
So you go into boot camp, right? You head off to boot camp. What's that like for you? I don't know anything about Army boot camp. Apparently, it's a cakewalk, from what I understand.
Well, I'm not going to deny that too hard. It was not. It was fun and exciting.
Good.
And I had never. I moved out of my house as soon as I graduated high school and got an apartment and was pretty independent, but still had never been more than 10 miles away from family. And so the getting shipped off to the other side of the country and needing to be totally self-sufficient, I think is great for a 19-year-old trying to become a man.
Yeah, I agree. Where did you end up going? You said cross country.
Benning.
Oh, okay.
Fort Benning.
That's in Georgia, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I was hoping it was going to be a little harder than it was. It wasn't as bad as you hear, and who knows what it is now today. But it wasn't quite as crazy as you get timeouts or anything like that. You still got you got screamed at and stuff like that. But I was wanting some Full Metal Jacket, some crazy shit, and that never happened.
That's the one thing I will say that I've learned over the years is that Marine Corps boot camp, that pipeline specifically is incredibly intense. All the other schools after that are pretty mild, by comparison to boot camp. And I think about when you go into a selection pipeline, very different story, right? Which is funny to me because the boot camp doesn't necessarily prepare you. But you come out of Marine Corps boot camp, you are ready to rock and roll because of the intensity of it. And I'm sure everyone gets a little something different out of it, but I had a great time actually. When I think back to it, I had a lot of fun in it. But it's so you're expecting it to be a little more intense.
Yeah, I was thinking I'd get yelled at a little bit more. I mean, they did all of that stuff, but in your head, you've got it built up this is going to be the hardest thing in the world, and then my dad yells at me more than this. So that was because I was infantry. The basic training ran straight into infantry school, so the whole thing ended up it's 14 weeks, I think, or was 14 weeks. Graduated that. When you graduate that, because it was infantry, that's when you get your blue infantry sash, whatever the thing is. And then the next step was going to airborne school, static line, which was also in Benning.
Just kind of cross campus, basically?
Yeah. And that was pretty easy. Airborne school was not physically difficult, but I don't like heights very much, so that was interesting.
Yeah, I was gonna say because planes fly at heights.
Yeah.
What's the, when you guys do a static line drop, what are you jumping from? Because they're not super high.
No, it's not super high. I don't know how high it can get, but like when we would do, Ranger Regiment's specialty is airfield seizures. And so every time that we would come back from being overseas, like every 6-month break that we'd be in country here, we'd do a practice airfield seizure somewhere around the country. And when you do those, you're jumping between like 600 and 800 feet.
Oh, wow.
Blacked out in the middle of the night.
Right.
And so it is not long at all from when the chute opens to when you slam into the ground.
What approximately how long? Minute?
No way, because
Not even?
No, like you jump out of the plane, and I would jump out of the plane and go, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, and then your chute would open all the way up, and then you're trying to orient yourself, and you've got all your shit is in front, your rucksack and your weapon systems all in front of you, so you don't want to hit the ground with that attached to you.
Right.
So you've got a pull cord that you pull that makes that stuff drop down to be, 15 feet below you.
Okay.
But if you pull that cord too early, it turns into a pendulum.
Ooh.
And you'll just start rocking back and forth. So you want to try and time it so you pull that right as you're crossing about the tree line. So you're only a couple of seconds before you pull that.
Okay.
Well, what often happens, because all of this is happening so quickly, and they'll shut down all the lights on the airfield, so you can't orient very well. You'll end up thinking you're about at that right spot, and you'll pull it, and as soon as you pull it, you'll hear that hit the ground, and then you'll go, oh shit, and then you'll slam into the ground right afterwards.
Ow.
So that happens there ain't much time that you're in the air.
Yeah. So I've heard people talk about a PLF, right? Parachute landing fall.
Mm-hmm.
How, which can you first of all, describe what that is to folks who don't know, who are unoriented to a PLF. What is that?
I guess it's the best way to fall without injuring yourself.
Okay, which doesn't make sense to me because I hear so many stories about guys getting injured jumping, knees, ankles, backs.
So as best as I understand it, with the chute open, you're falling at like 18-ish something feet a second still.
Oof. So pretty fast.
Pretty fast, because you don't want to be floating down getting shot at either.
Fair enough.
But like the average human can break their ankle at like 21 feet a second falling. So there's not a huge threshold there. So every single jump, if you've got 300 people that are jumping, 10 people are hurting something, a couple are breaking something every single jump. If the wind was bad or whatever, like 30 people might get messed up.
Right.
There's definitely some accepted injury with any jump.
Yeah. So a PLF, when you are coming down, I mean, you got it. I mean, I would think, okay, this is the hard part, right? You got to anticipate the ground coming, right? And then you try to go, like when you hit the ground, you're trying to go like knees, hip,
you try
back or whatever. Like
you try and go sideways if you can, and your feet have to be together, and it's really just like a coordinated way of collapsing onto the ground. So you just try and distribute it as you go from your heels to your calf to your thighs to then kind of your butt, and you kind of just roll.
Okay.
And it don't ever, like the way that it goes when you're standing 3 feet up on a platform and like you're practicing compared to what actually happens,
right,
is never very close. But if your feet aren't together, you've got a way higher chance of breaking something.
Right.
Like your feet being together is the first most important thing.
Yeah. And I imagine, so that's what I'm saying. Like as I'm thinking about this, I'm imagining in blackout conditions, anticipating that impact, and then being able to execute the PLF has got to be really difficult to do.
Yeah, because
what directions are you moving with the wind, etc.
Well, and you're hoping that you don't so half of it's grass and half of it's tarmac. You're hoping you don't land on the tarmac, and then even worse,
post.
Or the stupid lights that they have sticking up at the airfields everywhere.
Right.
So you're just hoping that, and then once you get on the ground, you're like, I hope none of my shit broke. And then you're laying there and you pull all your stuff together. You load your weapon system. You have to hook your nods up and put your nods on because that ain't out when you're jumping.
Right.
And then you've got to for the airfield seizures, the combat controllers with the Air Force jump out too, and they throw mini bikes out and shit. And so they're very quickly ripping up and down the airfield because they want to get the planes down quick. So we got to get all of our parachute stuff, get it all covered up, get it at least however many feet off the runway, because once we're on the ground, planes are coming down super quick behind us. So you don't want to get run over or one of your parachutes suck into the motor.
Right.
And so really, you get on the ground and you're like, okay, I'm not injured. I got to keep doing this now.
How many guys are jumping in a evolution like this?
Well, a platoon is about 30 people, and then with all of our support people with us, it's probably in about 40-ish. And I would imagine that you're not going to try and do an airfield without at least 2 or 3 companies, which would be probably six or 9 platoons. So there's a whole bunch of people in the air at one time,
right,
coming down, and then you'll pull up your map of what your first objective was, and then you just kind of go and meet at the rally point for that and start.
Right. Yeah, because I imagine your stick is going to land in different places, so you got to get your group together and try to coordinate, right?
And that's just the start of the night.
Right. Yeah, that's just the beginning of the evolution.
Yeah.
So yeah, get them on the ground, and then you go from there. So I know that. So you went to you went to jump school. So what's the pipeline after that?
So after airborne school I had to wait a couple of weeks or whatever for RIP to start, the Ranger indoctrination process, which for Ranger Regiment is the selection, just like BUDS is for SEALs. Mm-hmm. I think it was 6 weeks. I can't remember if it was 4 weeks or 6 weeks, but it was miserable. That was physically the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. Easy. And really, it's just a bunch of sick ways to try and get you to quit and turn on your partners and stuff like that.
Give me an example.
Well, when it started, the first day that you get on the buses and you get to the barracks, they're smoking you for a while, and it was raining that first day. And then they left us, they're saying they're in processing us and leave your shit here and go and stand at attention here in front of the building. And they're talking to you, and then they're like, okay, well, we'll be back in a couple of minutes. We got to figure something out. You guys don't move. I was like, okay. Well, then you're 3 hours later, we're standing there at attention, there's no way they forgot about us. What's going, and then you get somebody in there like, this is bullshit. I'm going to go see what's going on. Well, I'll go with you and come back. And those 2 people just got kicked out of selection because they didn't stand still when they were told not to move. And so, something like that happens a couple hours into the first day. And you're like, oh my God, none of us are going to survive this.
Right.
And then we had, when we were out in the field, which we were out in the field for the majority of it, the wood line was 200 meters away, and they would say, go and touch the wood line, and you'd go and touch the wood line, and they'd come back and they say, okay, now I want you to go and touch that tree. And you'd never be able to find the stupid tree that they were talking about, and then you'd come back and be like, are you screwing with me? I said go touch that tree over there, and you don't want to touch that tree? Okay, I guess you're in charge. Now you guys carry this log, and then you're running with a telephone pole over there and come back. And they're like, oh, well, you still didn't do something right. Now I want you to low crawl over there. So you're crawling for an hour to touch this stupid tree and crawling back. And just the sick things that they can do, like body weight, just to make you don't even need weights to be exhausted.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember, this is just so the similar mind game, right, is holding your finger out, your index finger out, and holding your weapon by the front sight, and just hold it there. And it's not, what's it weigh, 6 to 11 pounds, something like that, right? Somewhere in there. And I don't remember, but that is the heaviest weight possible on the planet at that point.
Oh,
when
yeah.
It's out at the extended tip of your finger,
Oh, yeah.
And, or holding your foot locker over your head for extended periods of time until you're just a quivering mass of goo, but the mind game there, designed to strip you down of your ego and strip you down of your oneness, right? And have you work as a team.
100%. You would get in, if you were the first one done with anything, you'd be damn near in as much trouble as the last one done, because you're just taking care of yourself. You're not taking care of the group. Yeah. And so that was, a lot of that stuff was putting you in stressful situations to see if you're going to be able to keep everybody together, or if you get to the point where you're so burned out, you're like, I'm only taking care of myself at this point. I'm done.
Right. What kind of academic stuff are they doing during that? Advanced infantry skills, or?
I mean, they're doing drills and stuff like that, but the intent isn't to teach you things. It's I'm going to show this to you that you're no way going to understand the concepts of in the hour or two that I'm going to go over it with you, and then I'm going to try and make you execute it like you've been doing it for 10 years, but really it's just all part of the games of, I want to see how well you retain information, how well you manage impossible situations.
Under duress.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was super cool that I just connected the dots with being here is, so from Black Hawk Down, the medic gets shot in the groin in the movie, and in real life, and ends up dying. And so there was a huge review of that incident afterwards, because it was they didn't really know it at the time, but it was a preventable cause of death, and that guy got killed super early in that mission, and so they had no medical capabilities moving forward from that. And so they were like, okay, well, what are we going to do about this moving forward? Well, the first phase of it came out as Ranger First Responder, which was that every single Ranger was trained in IVs, needle decompression, NPAs, and they had that big gnarly chest IO.
Oh, I remember those, yeah.
And so every single Ranger was going to be trained in Ranger First Responder. Well, they introduced that in selection, and basically it was like, we just want to see these guys take needles and bury them in each other's arms. Like, people were burying needles up to the hilt in there where their AC should be. Like, it was funny in medic school when I learned, like, that you're not supposed to let
how you're
much,
actually supposed to do it,
or that you're not, like, it's a big deal if you let hardly any air in there, because we're running huge tubes of air into each other, not knowing what's going on, and they're just laughing at us the whole time. Like, anybody who doesn't know, if you're in the military, you can't sue the military, so they can be pretty loose on what they want you to do, and you don't have many repercussions. But so Ranger First Responder then turned into TCCC, which now has turned into TECC. And so I just, in going through that class and learning about it, and learning that I was one of the first groups taught the first part of that, and now I'm one of our TECC instructors, and I think that stuff's awesome. Yeah. I just think that's a cool full circle.
Yeah, that's a neat connection point. Well, it really does show you one of the things that's really interesting to me is about the things that we've learned from combat in trauma medicine that can be applied in the real world. Back here in garrison, if you will, right, in the real world. It's really interesting how far advanced that field medicine is, and then we bring that back and you apply it to trauma on the streets here. So it's cool to see that.
Yeah, you learn new stuff with war. There's a whole lot of cost for it, but it definitely does push the needle of stuff like that.
Yeah. So the pipeline designed to make you quit, right? And you made it through. So what was it that you had in your mind when they're playing these games and they're just torturing you, essentially, right? Trying to force you to quit. What was it that kept you moving?
So because I was not the greatest citizen before I joined the Army. I did not have many people. For most of the people I knew were, for one, surprised that I even joined the Army, and nobody thought that I stood any chance at all of becoming a Ranger. Like I tried. I'm no good at sports. I was always on the bench playing football. I played 2 years, and then I was riding dirt bikes, doing dumb stuff. And so nobody thought I stood a chance at all of making it, other than really my mom and mainly my dad. And
that's mostly just because they
love
you.
They have to. What else are they going to say? And I am one of my primary motivators is people telling me what I can't do. So the whole time I was just in my head, like saying not great things about, well, I'm prove everybody wrong, and I'll do whatever I want to do, and I ain't gonna quit. If my body breaks, but I ain't quitting.
That's interesting. I think it's fascinating because I've talked to a lot of different dudes who've been through all kinds of different selection processes, and Army, Navy, Marine Corps, etc., and even Air Force. They have their specialties that will give them a little nod. But all those guys, the thing they have in common is this willingness to endure. But what's uncommon is the reason why, right? This idea of no quit, it's different for a whole different cast of people, right? For some people, it's, this is my, I promised my mother and my father that I would not quit on this. I had a girlfriend who told me I couldn't do it, or, whatever the mechanism might be. But there's all these different reasons that people have a no quit in them. But ultimately it boils down to they've made a decision for whatever reason that they would not quit. And if quitting is ever an option, they're done.
Yeah, you can't even, as soon as you even crack the door and begin to entertain that it is even a choice, you're starting down the path of figuring out ways to validate to yourself how to get there.
Right.
And so it's got to be, it's not a choice. Like if
Right.
my body fails, but I'm here till the end. And I would always tell myself, like, there are so many people that have come before me. I refuse to believe that I'm not at least as good as the worst of them that made it through.
Right. That's an important lesson to learn. I found myself telling someone recently, you've survived 100% of the worst days ever that you've experienced. So what makes you think you can't survive the next worst day? You're going to be fine. And I think it's a mindset that you have to develop. And you have to, some people get there naturally. They're born with the, Zulu Foxtrot, and nobody can tell them anything. And then they will never quit. And other people have to arrive there after some processing time and recognizing that, I can do these things. It's interesting to see that happen for folks. So what happens after you go through INDOC?
So I got to tell you, one of the funniest parts or best parts of it was like our culmination drill, like the last week of selection. We were out in the field nonstop, and like they wouldn't feed you much. But then like every 2 or 3 days for breakfast, they'd order, like if there were 60 of us there, they'd order food for 140 people. And it would show up and they'd say, you guys got 20 minutes to eat every last bite of food here, or we are not ordering you hot food ever again. So dudes are cramming this food down. Like some of them are going and making themselves throw up just to be able to eat more food. We get it all down, and then they're like, all right, awesome. Now we're going to go for a run.
I knew that was coming.
Yeah, and then so it doesn't even matter. Like there's not even a distance that you're running. It's just basically we're going to run until almost everybody is throwing up.
Right.
And then
we're tired of you running.
Yeah, and then they don't feed you again all day. I'm like, well, we got you guys a bunch of food this morning. What, you babies? Like how much do you need to eat? And then so same thing, it was wet and it was raining the whole time. And so the last couple of nights, I can't remember what the cadre was called. Not RTOs. That's us. But so they had a big barbecue out there. They had a big fire pit. They had nice tents, and they had a whole huge pile of brand new sleeping bags, and they were grilling up steaks. And we're standing out there soaking wet in the middle of the night, holding our rucksacks over our head, and they're walking around with these fresh steaks and saying, "Hey, all you got to do is drop your rucksack. I'll give you this big old steak. After you eat this steak, you can go and sit by that fire, and then we've got a nice warm sleeping bag for you. You'll be home in the morning, you take a hot shower, and you never have to think of this bullshit ever again." And even after like 3 weeks of putting yourself through misery, there were still multiple dudes that are like, "Wow. I'm done. I want a steak."
Wow.
But so that I thought was
the psychological warfare, but it just goes to show you how, when you get in duress, how quickly you can fall apart, right? Under pressure.
Yeah.
And that's the point, right? That's the point of that training, is to stress you to a point where you say, "I quit."
Yeah. As soon as you open that crack, they'll exploit it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because that's all they're doing. They're trying to bust the door open a little bit and get inside your brain and peel back your capacity for resisting misery.
So graduated selection, which was so awesome, because then I got my tan beret.
So how many folks do you think made it through? What's the attrition?
I think the average attrition is, give or take the needs of the unit at the time, I think it's about 80 to 90% attrition.
Damn.
Usually.
Yeah.
I know from my basic training, I think the numbers were about, from my basic training of people that started the same basic training as me, there was like 215 of us, and like 5 of us ended up making it all the way through and graduating selection. But very few of those 200 people had Ranger contracts, probably even had any desire at all.
So how many? So of the 80%, or sorry, of the people that go into RIP, those guys who don't make it through selection end up going back into just infantry units.
Yeah, and
or if they have other specialties, they go into a different area potentially.
And usually, I don't know how true it was, but we were always told like it wasn't great spots. Like if you get washed out, you're going to Korea or something like that, pretty much. So it wasn't like, "Oh man, I washed out a selection. Now my consolation prize is I'm going to Hawaii." It's like, no.
Right.
You better be all in, because the alternative ain't going to be great.
That's another good reason to not quit.
To not quit. So right. I picked, because you got to pick. There's 3 Ranger battalions: 1st Battalion, 2nd Battalion, 3rd Battalion. 1st Battalion's in Savannah, Georgia. 2nd Battalion's in Tacoma, Washington. 3rd Battalion's in Benning, Columbus, Georgia. And you got to pick the order that you wanted to try and go. And I picked Savannah because I'd never been by an ocean. And I ended up getting Savannah, 1st Battalion. So I got to 1st Battalion, and within like 6 weeks, 2 months, we were deployed to Afghanistan, because they were just up in their deployment.
They're in the
and so it was like 2 weeks, very quickly. Like, hey, we're here, and you're already late on us getting ready to get going.
Yeah.
And
how long is the workup's? Probably 6 months typically.
So between the 3 battalions, you'd do about a 4-month in country and 6 months back, and there'd be about a 2-weekish overlap on the front end and the back end where we're with the other teams getting briefed and debriefed. And so what the craziest thing about passing selection and then getting to your unit is you're like, okay, I just did the hardest thing that I've ever done in my life. Like, I'm good now. And it is,
I have arrived.
Yeah. And it is the exact opposite of that. It goes from like, okay, well, there's 40 to 60 people in selection, and there's 8 or 10 cadre, like you can still get by and squeak through on some things. No, but not everybody can eyeball everything.
Sure.
Well, when you get to your unit, you're one of like 2 or 3 new people getting to your unit of 40 dudes that have already been to war multiple times together, and you're the new guy coming in their house. They all made it through selection, so that's the last thing that they care about.
Right. Yeah, at that point, selection is merely interesting.
Yeah, that was just the ticket in the door.
Right.
And so you think that you get there and you're the big dog because, before you leave selection, like you're walking around base for that weekend and you're the dude with the tan beret and look at me, blah, blah, blah. And then you get to where there's only tan berets. They're like, you ain't even been to war yet. We don't give a shit what you've done.
And you don't have a tab or anything like that.
Yeah. So it was really rough. The first little bit, my first tour was pretty rough. We went to,
when you say rough, how is that? Like just hazing and
we were, it was freezing cold. We were above 10,000 feet most of the time. So it was freezing cold. We were just in, they were fancy tents, but they were like tents with heaters and stuff in them, but we weren't in hard buildings in Afghanistan. And I was not like, most of the people in that unit are physical specimens. Like I had multiple Division I football players in there with me, and like I wasn't even good enough to be on the field on JV football. And so they definitely rode me pretty good on trying to get me in shape and up to their level. And then on top of that, just teaching you the job. And that's as on-the-job training as it could be when we're doing it over there.
Yeah.
But it was so much fun. I had so much fun. So went first deployment to Afghanistan, second deployment to Mosul, Iraq. After my second deployment, they sent me to Ranger School because after you go to Ranger School, you're kind of in a leadership position. So they don't just send you right away. So after my second deployment, went to Ranger School, came back as a team leader, had 2 more deployments, 1 more to Iraq, and then my last one to Afghanistan.
What stands out to you about those deployments?
Well, like I said, I had a lot of fun. What stands out? That's so broad. So much stuff stands out. How a properly supported, mission-focused team is unstoppable. Can accomplish anything in the world. Just that the world's just filled with regular people, like there ain't a us versus them type of thing. Like there's normal women and children everywhere, like the whole you should carpet bomb everything's only something that a dumbass would say, because there's regular ass people. My first tour in Afghanistan, we were on some long mission and I was a top gunner, and like I had like so many pairs of gloves on, I could barely fit my hands in the butterfly trigger of the 50 cal.
Yeah.
And I'm up there freezing to death, and we roll through a village and there's like little kids running around barefoot in the snow, like having a great time. And you're just like, I'm frozen to death up here and these kids are playing around in skirts and shit. Every part of it, man. I wouldn't be anything that I am today if it wasn't for every part of that, from the structured part through selection, through the mentors I was able to have, the good stuff, the bad stuff, making friends, just learning the ways to do everything that way. I loved it. It was like living a video game for, especially the being overseas. When you're, my experience, all I can speak for, but if you work for JSOC, as soon as your wheels up heading overseas, you basically get whatever you need to accomplish your mission. Like it's pretty much a blank check. If you've got a job and you're good at your job, they make sure to put you in the position to accomplish your job, and there ain't anything beyond that. And that's the stuff that can get real powerful, like just to see when something is supported like that, how much regular people can do. Because there ain't nobody but that was, like you think growing up watching all these movies and stuff like that there's these higher echelons of people that never make mistakes and always know the right thing to do, and they're in charge and they're professionals. And it's like, nope. Everywhere that you think has got crazy good people doing things, they're just people like you and me.
Right.
Like there ain't no secret group of people that are totally dialed in all the time.
And even in those high echelon groups, you have morons, right, who are going to make mistakes and somehow made it through the pipeline, and you're like, what the hell is this guy doing here? In every group, right, you have lazy folks, you have people who are high performers, you have all different types. Yeah, even in those tier 1 groups, it's that's interesting. And mistakes are made, right? In every experience I've had, there's no operation ever goes flawlessly. And there's always a mistake made. There's always something to learn. There's always something to take away from it. The outcome might be favorable, right? There's not a single fire still burning in the in the greater Phoenix area, right? We've put them all out, but the way we got there was not always flawless. And there's a lot of work that goes into that. And a lot of mistakes are made, and we overcome that with resources and overcome that with skill and recovery. But these operations are not flawless.
No, and I think if you're not making any mistakes, you're not pushing the boundaries far enough. It's okay, and you should make mistakes when you're learning how to do things and trying to figure out how to do things the best way, or challenging plans. The issue comes in when you make the same mistake multiple times. It's okay to make a mistake, but you've got to learn from that mistake.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's the true wisdom, right? Is if you can learn from other people's mistakes, that's fantastic. But learning from your own mistakes and being thoughtful and introspective enough to go to recognize an error that you made, have the humility to own it, and then figure out how you're going to do it better next time and not make the same mistake, right? That takes a tremendous amount of thoughtful humility, in my opinion.
And speaking of which, was probably one of the earliest and best lessons that I got from regiment was, if there's even the idea that you screwed something up, you just say, I fucked up, that's on me, it won't happen again, and you move forward. There's no such thing as an excuse, and it don't even matter if it's not your fault. If it somehow was somebody that's underneath you or whatever, like that's it. Nobody wants to hear anything beyond that other than ownership, and it won't happen again, and we'll move on.
Right.
And I was really good at trying to talk my way out of situations prior to that, or why a thing wasn't my fault, or an excuse for this, that, or the other. And it didn't work very long before I learned that lesson.
Yeah. It's something that I had to work through too. And I have a funny experience that's flashing through my mind right now. I'll share with you. When I was in boot camp, I was the guide, right? I don't know if they have that position in Army boot camp, but I was like kind of like the platoon commander, essentially, of the recruits. So they basically I had to do head counts, and I was accountable for all the nonsense. So one day the drill instructor takes all the platoon out, stands them on formation out in the hot San Diego sun, and keeps me on the quarterdeck. And my back is to the platoon. They're outside there. And I'm inside the quarterdeck. And he's looking out at the platoon over my shoulder. And he starts smoking me. Push up, sit up, side straddle hops until I'm a puddle of sweat. And he says, guide, until you learn how to, I'll try to use his voice, guide. He goes, until you learn how to unfuck these guys, you're going to get tortured every day. And so this went on for like 45 minutes. And I'm like, and in my mind, I'm like, how am I supposed to control this platoon when they're standing outside, right? But it's bigger than that, right? When you talk about the leadership principle, you have to take ownership, first of all, for what they're doing. Own that it's your responsibility. And then from there, you can reconcile it. I can't handle the fact that Gomez is out there scratching his behind. How do you control that, right? It's still your responsibility to make sure your guys have discipline instilled in them. And that is it's a hard lesson to learn, because learning how to disseminate information and maintain and extend accountability to other people it's tough. It's a lesson, and it takes work to learn how to do it.
Yeah, we would get told you can't expect what you don't inspect. And so it's always a back and forth between empowerment and micromanaging, because you empower your guys more and more and more, and then something burns you that you were, and then it's like, okay, I got yelled at because you screwed something up that I had trusted you to do. Now we're going back to, I got to micromanage you a little bit more.
Right.
Well, your guys don't like that. And so it's constantly a where are we in the pendulum between empowerment and micromanaging.
No,
and
that's a great.
Yeah, and whenever something went wrong, it was always, well, you can't expect what you don't inspect. Why didn't you check that guy's shit? And it's like, in your head, you're like, well, he's a grown-ass man. But outside, it's, I fucked up. It won't happen again.
Right. Well, and it's a relationship of trust, right?
Yeah.
So the guy who's saying, hey, man, why are you micromanaging me? Well, because I don't trust you.
Yeah, you made me.
I have to earn, you're going to have to earn my trust. So that's if I show up to inspect and your shit is dialed in, guess what? You've earned some trust. And next time I probably won't spend as much time inspecting because you've earned that. So it's, and that's, I think, an important lesson too for the person who's a follower, right? Learning to follow means being trustworthy, right? And your boss or your, upline has to have faith that you're going to execute on the expectations that have been given to you. So it's an interesting dynamic when people feel untrusted. Well, are you trustworthy, right? What are you doing to earn that trust? That's I'm glad you brought that up. That's a really important premise in so many ways.
And it's hard because you can't, nor do you want to oversee everything. Like you can't do anything else if you're doing that.
Right.
But you have to, I am a firm believer in the buck stops here, and if somebody falls under me, it's ultimately on me if something doesn't go right.
Yeah.
And so it's always the back and forth.
So what's interesting about that? There's the principle of leading up applies also, which I think is interesting. So you talk about micromanaging your subordinates, right? Or providing leadership to those that you're responsible for. But interestingly, I think sometimes we fail to recognize, we blame our bosses for stuff, and we're like, well, they didn't do X, they didn't do Y. So what's our responsibility to lead up the chain of command?
Well, that's a hard one. That's a totally different dynamic of a challenge in the military versus in the fire service, because the fire service is so much less rigid in its chain of command structure. I'd say it's easier in the fire service to do that because it's an expectation that we lead our peers up, at least, like on fireground or whatever. So I think you just got to be tactful at it.
Right.
And I need to learn that lesson a little better myself, and the being a little bit more tactful in the way that you approach trying to lead up a superior.
Right. Well, it's interesting. Right? I think that good bosses are welcoming of that leadership, right? They're welcoming of the information from their subordinates. They have to subjugate their own ego, set it aside, and welcome that information. If you think that something that I'm doing is bullshit, you need to tell me. Because if I'm going down a path that is going to get us in trouble. I am not the grand wizard with all the information, right? We're a team, and it's important that all the players in the team bring their various perspectives to the table. Now, there's a time and a place, right? In the middle of a firefight, is it always the person who's in charge needs to be in charge, right? Same thing, that's just the way it's built out, because somebody has to be the point of responsibility and point of contact. However, if you have good information that's going to affect the outcome and you sit on it, man, that's not good.
Yeah.
You got to share that information, right? You got to lead up and find a way to share that information so that we don't step on a landmine, figuratively and literally.
No, we could definitely use a little bit more coordinated leadership training, because those are hard, because everybody's insecure, and so it takes a lot of confidence to be able to say out loud, I don't have all the answers, I am not the end all be all, and that somebody with a fraction of the time, rank, or experience might solve this problem better than me.
Yeah, that's something that I think that is, from a leadership perspective, is really, really important to develop. And it's not, it's not easy, because you get thrust into a position of leadership and someone says, here's these bugles, right? And suddenly you're the boss, and now you're responsible for everything that happens here. And recognizing that and you bring up the word insecurity, I think is really important, right? We have to be a little bit vulnerable, and setting your ego aside is a vulnerable move. But, I look around me and I go, man, as much education as I have, as much experience as I haven't seen it all, right? I haven't been to Armor Ranger School, right? You've learned some things that I don't know, and I think in order to be the best version of myself that I can be, I need to find out what you know and learn from you, right? So that means I have to be open to that experience and open to your set of knowledge and open to your opinions and perspective. I don't have to take it all, but I have to listen to it and do something with that information.
Because like you said earlier, the whole point is to try and learn from other people, not only learn through your own bruises.
Right, exactly.
Otherwise, you'll never get anywhere.
Yeah, you'll
other
be
than just hurt all the time.
Heap.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, no, I think what was the mentality in battalion that I've tried to apply here is in order for me to succeed, the best way that I can go about that is my main job is to make sure that my 3 guys on my truck have everything that they need to do their job the best, is to put them in the position to where I support them in being the best engineer, senior firefighter, and booter possible. And by supporting that, it will secondarily just make my job easier, to where all I got to do is follow them around and narrate,
Right.
That's the selflessness was something that was important from the Army, and that I was told very early on, you need to understand that when you're out on a mission, your primary responsibility is not your own life. It's the 3 other guys on your team's life. And that if you understand that everybody is working that way, then every single body has 6 eyes watching their back, not 2. And that's where that comes into that force multiplier stuff and everything. Is you're invincible when you're working that way, not as 4 individuals. And so that's where and it has worked out for me well, is I just really try and support my guys so that they can do their positions as best as they can and get them opportunities. And it just makes my job easier, rather than me trying to focus on how I can control and manage everything, because you can't.
Right.
You can't.
Yeah, exactly. What's What's something that keeps you up at night?
I'm worried about active shooter stuff, I would say, would be the biggest. I feel like it just seems like that stuff is unfortunately a consistent inevitability at this point. And I kind of always run on a fear of failure type of stuff. And just, I think that we could be a little bit more prepared, a little bit better with that. That we just, due to the volume of calls that we run on, that we don't have people hurt more often. Just how do you run 500,000 things and not just on accident have people get hurt more often?
Right. Yeah, a good friend of mine says that we run around with a 4-leaf clover crammed up our wazoo.
It's insane how true that is.
Right. I mean, we get away with a lot of stuff frequently, right?
It's insane how true that is.
Yeah. So how do we, I mean, I think the obvious answer is training, but how do we overcome those variables?
Well, if I had that figured out better, I would already have tried to have implemented it in some way.
Wow. No, and so what I would say is I think that as a fire service, we're all moving in the same direction, right? We're all working toward being better prepared, trying to mitigate all the various hazards that exist out there, right? In this all hazards environment. And it's very difficult to train all these different things consistently and develop and kind of raise the bar across all these different skill sets. But because it's hard doesn't mean we can't do it. It means we have to work toward it, right? And that's the interesting challenge.
I think we could dial those things a little bit better in if we went back to the basics a little bit on we need to be operating with like a commander's intent. We need to better manage span of control and unity of command, and all of these things can be managed, but it can't just be managed by 100 people looking at the board and everybody trying to do their best on their own. It's got to be done through, hey, here's the commander's intent priority of triaged importance, and here's my span of control of under that of who's managing what, because otherwise the scope is just so insane that you'll just be mediocre at everything instead of great, because it's just too much. It's all doable.
Yeah. Yeah. It takes a plan in place, right? Very well considered and well articulated plan, and that's a challenge. It's hard to do, but not impossible. And so we kind of avoided the whole, or we didn't avoid it. We kind of didn't get to how you became a Phoenix firefighter. We skipped right over that part. But so here you are on the job. You're a captain now, and what is it about? What are some non-negotiables for you as a company officer? You've been, and I'm going to frame this in the sense that you've been through a pipeline of leadership training and skills for many, many years, and have had a lot of different experiences, a variety of experiences at all levels, from being a line troop, in the Army, and line firefighter, and on up to leadership roles. So when you think about what's most important to you, right? What are your non-negotiables?
I won't ask anybody to do something that I haven't or won't do myself. We had in regiment, NCOs had a higher standard across the board than you did when you first got in, for PT tests, for everything. And the thought process behind it is, if your boss is doing more than you, how can you ever question what you're supposed to be doing? You can't. They're at the front of the line running. They got to run faster. They got to run further. How are you going to bitch about the littler amount that you have to do? And so the leading by example and the never asking anybody to do anything that you're not willing to do yourself, I think will get you so far in life. And then just recognizing that I am responsible for 3 other families' well-being, and how much more dumb shit I would be willing to put myself in danger of without ever even batting an eyelash, to absolutely not am I comfortable with somebody else doing something if the outcome is me potentially having to talk to their wife or husband or kids or parents about some sort of bad outcome. And then just like work hard. I'll give you everything I got if you're trying. If you're not trying and you don't take this stuff serious, like I'm not good with that, with those situations.
Yeah.
I'll give you the world if you're trying, but if you're not going to get much of my attention or time.
I love all that. I love those things. The one that you mentioned that really stands out to me is recognizing that you have a stewardship over 3 human beings, a responsibility. And that responsibility is not just those individuals. It's all the individuals connected to them. You know, if anything happens to them, you owe them an explanation for what's happening, what's taking place. And
because it's on you, ultimately.
Did you train them? Did you supervise them? Were your skills intact? Like, what things did you do or not do that allowed this thing to take place? And even we talk about ownership, right? If that person, that firefighter, made a mistake on the fire ground, well, did you train them? Did you hold them accountable for a skill set, right? Your responsibility goes deep. And sometimes folks get into that front right seat and they're like, sweet, I got to push buttons and talk on the radio. But your responsibility, your stewardship is much, much more profound than that, and extends to all those people that you talked about. Not to belabor it, but I think it's such an important point.
Yeah.
So, man, well, I think I'm gonna peel us off right there. I want to ask you a couple rapid fire questions. Just first thing that comes to your mind. What's something that you believe that other people think is crazy?
That we can solve all these problems we got.
Good. Yeah, it is crazy. What's one piece of advice that you've been given? What's one great piece of advice that you've been given?
Don't be afraid to ask for help. Like, it's only in your ego will so often be the thing that stops you from getting what you need, because you're afraid to say that you've done something wrong, or you need help, or you don't know the answer, or you're scared, or whatever it is. It's often your pride will be the biggest problem most of the time. And that if you can shed that, it's hard. Everybody fails at it all the time. But as long as you recognize that that's one of your enemies, I think that's important.
I love that. All right. So this podcast is titled the Fireground Fitness Podcast. So what does being fireground fit mean to you?
I saw that. I'm the last person to talk to about fitness. Since I have no room to speak about physical fitness stuff with that, I'd rather wrap it into like the mental health stuff of there is a significant cost to this job, and no one gets away from paying that price. And if you're not careful, you will end up a miserable, alone alcoholic down the road, because we eat everybody's worst day all day long, and that goes somewhere for everyone. No one's immune to that. And so recognizing that you're just a normal human being, that things affect you, and that you're willing to ask for help, and that therapy's super important. I thought I was too tough to have a therapist until I was about 30 years old, and that was probably some of the dumbest thought processes that I've ever had. And that I got a VA therapist, I got a fire department therapist, I got a marriage therapist, I got a team of them. And just like the alternative to thinking that you can gut through all of this stuff on your own will just end up making you alone and miserable. And why, like, if something's broken on your car, you don't ignore it. You fix it. It's not necessarily your car's fault that something broke on there, but it's your fault if you ignore it. And, so just, especially with us, if we got such an amazing peer support program, and with the Tiger Law, or where we have all the access to the
Craig Tiger Act.
Yeah. Where we basically have access to free therapy. Like, if you're not using that, you're an idiot, because you're not going to be the exception that's somehow immune to this. Right. It's going to catch up with you at some point.
Yeah.
And so get in front of that early rather than waiting until it's too late and you look back. Because this is a hard job, and we need everybody at 100%. To get through this stuff. And that's the mental part is something that I think especially as young men who think that they're always the problem solvers, are always intimidated bringing problems, and that wraps back into the pride thing.
Yeah.
That only exists in your head. It's not a real thing. You're way tougher if you can say out loud, hey, I'm messed up right now. I need some help. That's so much tougher than I'm good.
Right. No, I appreciate you saying that. That's a very important thought, an important premise. When it comes to fireground fitness is so much more than just physical fitness. It is multi-pronged. And so I'm glad you brought that piece up, because you got to take care of the brain. Your brain housing group controls the entire system. And if you're not taking care, if you're not flossing your mind, you're not flossing your brain, and taking care of your mental health, it's a slow decay, and it's a problem. So you got to root that out. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah. And
I appreciate you sitting down and sharing a little bit of your story with me and with the gang, or whoever's listening, whoever's out there, all y'all. So Matt, thank you.
No, this was awesome. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Hey folks, that's all we have for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Matt, thank you for sharing your time and your talents with us. If you are enjoying this podcast, get on over to Apple Podcasts, rate and review the podcast. It will help draw other folks in and give them an opportunity to listen to the cool content that you're listening to. Also, think about what you've learned today, lessons picked up that Matt shared with us that you can take and apply in your own life in whatever way you choose. Now, the most important thing is that you go on out there and get some.